this is Jennifer Lopez. And actually, that looks like a Hitler mustache. I've changed my mind.
And my interpretation is incest.
And we gotta hurry up and get this ritual shit going out.
Hogs. Yeah, fish facts.
Hey, do diamondback snakes actually eat corpses?
Nothingness.
Hello, my name is Christopher Albright, and this is Panel by Panel, a show in which we read your favorite comic books. Today with me is a special guest. He's a lover of etymology and a reformed hater of cell phones, Mr. Tony Wolf. How are you doing today?
Hi, Christopher. Thank you. I'm doing great. I'm so thrilled to be here on your show. By the way, I want to say I love your intro. I really love that intro. And what is the answer to diamondback snakes? Do they eat entire people or what?
They can eat people, apparently. That's what we ended up finding out, is that sometimes they do. We have Mr. Hakimi already on stream. Hello, Hakimi. I love you so much.
Hey.
Thank you for showing up. Now, today we're going to read Tales from the Wolf. Is that right?
Yes, Tales from the Wolf. It's sort of a riff on Tales from the Crypt.
That's what I was going to say. We're actually going to talk about the cover a little bit, but I wanted to point out after reading this, and I'm going to say this, I don't mean to be rude in any way, but it did not feel like you were a comic book writer. It felt like you were a comic book journalist. Like, these are just observations, and you were just telling me this almost a documentary at times in some of the readings.
You've nailed it. You've nailed the approach, sincerely.
It was fantastic. I was really getting into some of it, going, well, there's not a page turn here, but like, I'm still invested in that story. Anything else you want to say? Oh, go ahead.
Most of the work I've done in comics, I have done some fiction or sci-fi or fantasy. If I've done that, it's almost always been stuff where another writer wrote it and I illustrated it. When left to my own devices as a writer/artist, I found, kind of to my own surprise, that I really like writing what I'll call essay comics, right? Because, and you've nailed how I've described it. It's almost like reading an essay in a magazine, instead of a prose essay where I let you in on my thought process. It's a comic essay. And I like the idea of sort of nonfiction, pseudo-journalism comics. And I often thought, even especially about this comic we're about to read together today, that I literally, as I was making it, I literally thought of the word documentary. I thought, this needs to be like a documentary where I take the audience through trends at the time, what was going through my mind. So it's really more like a narrative essay or a documentary.
It's fantastic. It's exactly, I was thinking about sitting with my wife watching documentaries. I was like, if this was on TV, like, this is exactly how this would play. Let's go ahead. We're going to open this up and see. Okay. I always talk about the covers first. The cover is how we market our book. It's the most raw form of marketing that we have. What made you decide to use this cover, Tales from the Wolf, for your book?
So many years ago, going back maybe to 2018 or 2019, I thought, by that point, I'd done a bunch of short stories, and I really like the short story form. And especially, you and I talked a little bit in the pre-show talk. I really like doing short stories, partly because I love drawing and I love focusing for hours and hours on drawing. However, I may not always be inclined to complete a 100-page graphic novel or a 100-page narrative. And years ago, I always remember Alan Moore, the famous Alan Moore, saying, if you can learn to write a short story, like encapsulate a story of some kind or a piece of some kind in the short form, that's like a hyper compressed training towards storytelling in general. And I have also seen prose writers say the same thing. If you want to learn writing, start with short stories first. So I knew that once I cranked out enough short stories, I could one day do a paperback collection, which would essentially be a short story collection. And I think even people like Stephen King occasionally might release a short story collection. And starting around the year 2013, I turned out 2 or 3 short stories a year that were between 5 and 11 or 12 pages each. So in any case, the time came for me to say, I think it's time to do a paperback collection. What would I call it? And I just thought, well, what is it literally? It's Tales by me. So I could call it Tales from the Wolf, riffing on the Tales from the Crypt. And if I'm going to do that, I've always loved homages where you kind of draw on an existing iconic design as your template. And I thought, Tales from the Wolf. Well, that will tell the reader exactly what it is. I'm Tony Wolf, Tales from the Wolf, and let's do a Tales from the Crypt cover. And then I can use the little circular windows and give little snippets of some of the other short story topics you will see within this paperback collection.
Absolutely. We have Akimi again saying this is deeply cool already. Now, real quick, Akimi,
Oh,
what we're about to read is a legitimately true story through the lens of Tony Wolf. I just read it a minute ago to finish this and be ready. And I said, wow, this is really cool.
Most of the book is nonfiction and sort of journalistic nonfiction essays.
Yes. This next cover beside it, the 1-800 Dead Robin. Anything specific you had to say about that cover?
Well, this is riffing on one of the existing preview images in house ads in 1988/89 DC Comics as they began to promote this very unique stunt where readers would call in. It was actually a 900 number, but I thought for the purposes of a cute, catchy title, I would say 1-800 because
Yeah.
sounds sillier. And the colorist and Photoshop helper formatter on so many of these early stories I did is this great illustrator and artist and technical expert named Thomas Griffin, who self-published some of my early mini comics and colored a great deal of my early work and some work through the years. So essentially, I said to Thomas, I said, I think let's do a cover image for this specific story. And I think I want to call it Tony Wolf's True Tales of Comics. Like that would be the sub umbrella imprint under these, because I wanted to do comics about being a comics fan. And so that would be like a little subheading of narrative nonfiction short stories. So then I said I had a general idea. You know, it's really great when you work with a collaborator. You scribble something on a cocktail napkin practically. You do a quick little sketch on a Post-it. And I thought, this is what I was thinking for a cover. What do you think? And Thomas takes that, builds off it, and works this up and colored it differently than the corresponding panel within the book with that very dramatic red color.
I love the red color. Note from Hakimi again. Now, Hakimi is someone who has been here since the start for me. He is, I believe, 22 years old, and he's stating here as someone from a younger generation, journalistic nonfiction around comics, especially in that time period. He didn't get to experience these things. So this is something that you're also going to show new readers, to new people.
Yes,
we're going to move ahead.
Oh, go ahead. This is a documentary, effectively. So
effectively, yes.
People like Hakeem, if I have the name correctly, will be, you'll be watching my comics documentary, except it's not on film; it's on comics.
And it's a documentary about yourself because it opens with you. It opens with how you saw these books. Go ahead and tell me about these first 2 pages and what's happening.
So in early 1940s EC Comics, which is a horror comics line, horror, suspense, sci-fi sometimes, they often opened with a certain style of dramatic page, often composed by an illustrator named Wally Wood, whose formal name was Wallace Wood, and he would get cranky and cantankerous if people called him Wally. But they would there was also a 1980s TV series based on some of those called Tales from the Crypt, and some kind of narrator would introduce the story in kind of a faux dramatic, listen to my tale as I tell you of a dark night long ago. So with this story, I thought I want to kind of spin on that formula, and I will give you like a mock comedic serious opening, as if there's also an ancient poem called Rhyme of the Ancient Mariner, which is
Mhm.
like 18th century. I don't know that it's Coleridge or Yeats. I was an English lit major, so I'm always trying to get those literary references in. And I thought, I voted to kill Robin. Like, they actually did this. I called the number to kill Robin. So I thought, what if I start the story as a narrator who's like confessing his crime? Like,
Oh.
I've held this burden in my conscience for years, and now I must unburden myself to you, the reader. Let me tell you the tale of killing a child. You know, so therefore, you can imagine, and I also do professional voiceover work because I'm an actor as well. So when I'm writing these comics, I literally speak them out loud in my room as I'm writing and drawing them to see if they would sound good as a voiceover. So I imagine this kind of fake Edgar Allan Poe opening where it's, long have I carried this heavy burden, dear reader. I shudder to confess it now, but like Montresor in the Cask of Amontillado, the time has come for me to tell my tale. A
And you
story
can
which
feel
could
the
only
camera
be
slow
told.
zooming.
Yes, and those old comics from the 1940s, they would give that kind of introduction, and then the title would be in a huge overlay, much like a movie opening titles.
Yeah. I want to talk about this next page too because you're a cartoonist, right? There's a
Yeah.
little bit of a difference in how scripts are done, how pages are done. You're
Yes.
choosing when you're choosing to draw on these panels, you're choosing what exactly?
Well, it's funny. You've alluded to it earlier. I'm not necessarily clearly, I'm not really going for like a dramatic page turn, admittedly,
Mhm.
right? I'm sort of more concerned with the pace at which I want to take you through my little documentary. Um, and I, with a lot, the great thing about writing, I used to think, oh, I'm not a writer. I could never be a writer. I can't really write. And I said, I don't really have that many fiction ideas. Whenever I draw a comic, it's someone else writing the fiction and the plot and the characters. And one of my old buddies, Michael Turney, who's a filmmaker and former child actor himself, he said, if you don't feel that you have fiction ideas that are worth doing, why don't you write autobio narrative essays? Just tell stories from your life or
Yeah.
give your own thought process. And so I'm just very focused on, once I get an idea for a story that I'm excited about, that I think would be interesting enough to a stranger, the script almost comes to life pretty quickly. It's almost like a couple of rock stars through the years. They say, oh, I wrote that hit song in 20 minutes. When it's flowing, and this is not just for me, it's I think it's for anyone who's in a creative flow state.
Mhm.
I just feel like, oh, wow. As I sit down to lay out the story, it sort of comes to me. How do I lay it out? What will be in each panel? What will the narrative be? And how should I pace the taking you through this journey? If that answers your question.
Absolutely. Absolutely. We're going to move to the next two pages now. We're going to see a little bit more. Let me know about these. Now you're talking about Jason Todd and another one
Yes.
of the Robins, right? Go ahead and tell me what happens.
So what I wanted to do with this comic was make the comic digestible, even to people who don't care at all about comics. So that was
Yes.
part of my like documentary sensibility. So if you don't know who the Robins are, if you don't know that there have been several Robins, I kind of walk you through it. So Robin, he shows up in 1940 Batman comics. Then there was Jason Todd, his successor in the role, who happens to look almost exactly like the first Robin. And then I take you through the fact that when Jason Todd was created, editors tried to give him a personality so
Mhm.
that he didn't seem too much of a carbon copy of the prior character to hold the name Robin. And the personality they gave him was that he was a bit of a troublemaking, badass, violent kid who maybe liked to beat up on criminals a little bit too much, bordering on the Punisher kind of sensibility. And that was their attempt to give him some dramatic tension.
Now, you mentioned your documentary sensibilities. You talked about that a little bit earlier too.
Yeah.
The To talk about documentaries, the point of them isn't to make the product look cool, right? It's to tell people why the product was cool. Is that correct?
Yeah, yeah. And also, I just kept thinking about what would be fun for me to draw and what would be a way to hopefully creatively convey these moments that I'm describing in the sort of documentary narration.
Is there anything else that you would consider a tip for anyone that wanted to do documentary style books like this? Is there anything else that you'd suggest to them when thinking about laying out their stories and what they want to say?
That's a good question. I think also the way I'm doing it here is only one way. There really
Mhm.
is no universal way. I've seen a lot of nonfiction or autobio comics or documentary comics that, there might be 10 panels per page on those.
Okay.
They might make the whole page almost like a poster where the narration flows throughout the page. What I will say is, um, when I have written any of these various autobiographical stories, what I always try to approximate, and this advice I would give to anyone,
Mhm.
is tell the story like you're telling the story to a friend at a party. Like, keep in mind that the reader should feel like they're being personally told this like a conversation in their head.
That's good advice. That's one of those things that you overthink it, and then when someone says it out loud, you go, "Oh yeah, no, he's completely right."
Well,
Um,
hopefully, I mean, this is again, there's many conclusions that can be come to. This is just the conclusion I came to in my journey.
I like it. Let's move on to our next page right here. Anything to say about this one?
So, DC Comics was famously formerly housed at 666 Fifth Avenue, which is kind of funny. I actually worked at a law office at a law firm at that same building, 666 Fifth Avenue. So
Nice.
I just felt like I had to draw that building, and the colorists put a nice, shiny sheen on the building. And I'd read so many interviews and articles about how they came up with this stunt that Robin's life or death would be determined by a phone vote. They really did this right before the first Tim Burton Batman movie came out. And I wanted to give a hyper condensed summary of all the facts I had learned about how DC Comics editorial came up with this stunt. And the famous artist Mike Mignola, or Mike Mignola, depending how you're told to pronounce his name, drew these beautiful covers, one of which is Robin slow-mo with blood all over him. And I thought, I have to draw my version of that. And then in the next panel on that rightmost page, I saw an opportunity to bring in a little comedy. So it's like we all kind of thought Batman's better as a loner anyway. And then much like Chip Zdarsky kind of is doing now in comics, or Matt Fraction, these writers that bring a comedic touch sometimes to their Batman work, I thought it would be kind of funny if you have Batman alone on a rooftop going, "I'm so alone. I must brood." Just a little playful little joke.
And it's wonderful because the whole thing is littered with these little playful jokes. You break up the serious story that we're telling, and then every now and then a panel will catch me off guard, and I go, "Oh, that was actually good." Like it
Right.
lands.
Thank you.
Is there any amount of beats for jokes that you want to do? Like, do you aim every single time, or do you just let it breathe? Is it intuitive?
I feel like it sounds maybe like a silly answer, but it's just organic to whatever it is. I have done a lot of improv comedy acting and acting that was improvisational, sketch comedy. I think I've done over 150 sketch comedy videos with
Oh,
friends
wow.
over the years. Some friends who are like big in the comedy world, and some friends who are just cranking out lots of videos.
Mhm.
So I don't know. I kind of listen to my own instincts as to when. A lot of it, I will say this, much in keeping with the idea that the stories I tell should feel like I'm telling you the story at a party. I think of the phrase stream of consciousness. So whether it's a strength or could be a weakness in my writing, I'm kind of taking you through my stream of consciousness.
I like that. That's a solid answer. It's how I was feeling too, but I wanted to find out we're going to move forward a little bit more. And the next 2 pages, let me know.
So I wanted to give the reader this sense of what it felt like in comics in the 80s. Meaning, back in the 1980s, when a character died and it felt like it had some gravity or gravitas or importance to it, characters dying back then still felt like it meant a little bit more. And if the writers of a given superhero story arc, like Crisis on Infinite Earths, when Barry Allen famously died, or Supergirl was killed at one point, back then, death still had meaning. So if they told a story that had real emotional punch, you actually felt the illusion that the death was real. And you weren't really focused so much on the idea that they'll probably be brought back to life by the writers in approximately 1 or 2 years, which by now in the modern world is kind of standard. Like when characters die, we kind of know they're going to be back in 5 minutes, essentially.
I didn't even think about how the first death actually meant something back in the day. I've never even considered that because I am raised in that era of death
Yeah.
doesn't mean anything to the reader anymore. That is mind blowing for me. Um,
Oh yeah,
I
when Phoenix died in the late 1970s, early 80s X-Men, people were distraught. Like it rocked their worlds.
That's crazy to even consider. This next page actually has a quote on it. It's a Stan Lee quote saying that comics are about the illusion of change. What exactly does that mean?
So just that, Stan Lee was talking about how in comics, let's say he was writing Spider-Man for many years, you can't change too much of the core concept. Or if you do, you might risk losing your audience. So you have to give the readers comics in many ways, superhero comics at least, and a lot of adventure comics, even if they're not superhero, they're kind of a soap opera, right? A lot of the television shows that we watch, did you binge season 3, season 4? They're kind of all like some version of a soap opera, whether it's an action soap opera or a melodrama. So Stan Lee was always thinking, you need to change certain elements of your plot just enough for the reader to feel like something dramatic is actually happening and the status quo is being shaken up. But you
Mhm.
can't change it too much. Otherwise, you might kind of lose the reader entirely with your formula. In Spider-Man, you can't really kill Aunt May and all his supporting characters and totally change all his powers, and say now Spider-Man lives on the moon or something. So Stan Lee was always coaching his writers, and obviously Stan Lee took a lot of writing from Steve Ditko, who was co-writing the books practically. But you need to give the readers just enough soap opera change for them to feel like something really earth-shaking is happening. But you can't change the status quo too much. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. And Hakimi, I'm going to read this one
I'm
exactly
sorry,
as
I've
it's
been
written.
babbling so much. I haven't looked at the chat enough.
It's fine. Whoa, Tony absolutely gets it. It's ironically why the CW got into the Arrowverse and Smallville.
Yes. Oh, absolutely. And I watched a lot of those shows. You can only change so much, and those shows, especially CW, is very soap opera-y, right? I feel like that's kind of a standard of the CW world.
I also, on the second page, not to skip you around too much, but the
Yeah.
other line that was my favorite was seeing a picture of you at a phone and it just saying, I was voting for change. Like, that, it hit me so hard because it's like, okay, I'm the same way, but at the same time, I'm a bad person and like all I get it. I got it. It's just to my core. Anything else about that page you want to say?
Thank you. Thank you for getting that, because I almost, not to get political, but I kind of wanted that to allude to any time universally we're voting
Universally.
in our society for
Hmm.
anything, that we're voting, right? Whatever party or affiliation you might fall on, the iconic thing is that you're voting so that things will improve in society. And so I wanted to subtly play with that line that I was voting for change, to shake up Batman, to change the world, but also the grim counterbalance of I'm voting to kill a teenage character. I'm voting to
Yep.
kill a child. And how
Yep.
grim is that I was like eagerly voting to kill this kid who's a fictional character, of course. But by the
still.
way, I'll mention on the opposite page, I drew my old comic book shop owners on suburban Long Island. Those are them. That's not a photo reference. That's from memory. And I vividly remember the guy gleefully chomping on a cigarette or whatever, going, "Yeah, Robin's gonna die. Vote for death." Like a classic, hilarious Brooklyn, almost like Sopranos character. Vote for death. Hey, it's gonna be funny. Vote for death. And I thought I
Oh my
have to tell the
gosh.
readers about that.
That's fantastic. Are we ready to move to the next 2 pages?
Yeah, absolutely. By the way, I mean,
Oh,
also for you, you have like local comic book stores from childhood that you fondly look back on or amusingly look back on, or
yes.
yeah. I don't know. I think there's a treasure house of amusement to be held in like those looking back at our weird comic book stores.
I think about all the people. I played a lot of Magic the Gathering. I think about all the
Oh,
people
nice.
that I've sat with to play Magic the Gathering, and there's a handful where I'm like, I'm never gonna forget that match. No one knows about it.
Yeah,
It's just for me forever. It's my history
yeah,
now.
yeah.
Um, to talk about the history, talk about the image here of Batman holding Robin. That is the core image that I use. I love that image in general. And you knocked this one out of the park, by the way, when
Thank
drawing
you.
this. Tell me some more about these 2 pages.
So in the original image drawn in the comic, which is by the illustrator named Jim Aparo or
Mhm,
Aparo, depending on how you pronounce it. I think in some ways that was inspired by a classical Michelangelo sculpture
mhm,
called, I think it's called the Pieta, which is Mary holding Jesus when he is, deceased or dying.
mhm.
And sometimes with my comics, I really love to draw my version of some iconic image that was already drawn by some big deal illustrator. So I thought, I have to draw this. And to draw attention to the image, I'm going to do no background and just let it sit in a floating sea of white. And to further emphasize kind of the documentary feeling, there's just only going to be text floating around, taking
Wow.
you through that page. And the colorist did a wonderful job. There's a real, I don't know, there's such a joy in drawing. And I really love drawing, and it kind of opens up my heart. So, as silly as it may sound, my heart opened up working on this story because it was just a passion project. And I researched so many articles about all of this. And I took, like a journalist would, I took the best tidbits and distilled them into this story. Frank Miller really did say that he thought it was sort of cheap and cynical to kill Jason Todd, even though Frank Miller sort of plugged that idea, inceptioned that idea into people's heads in the first issue of The Dark Knight Returns, when you see the Robin costume in a glass case, and Batman is narrating that Jason was a good soldier. Like all
Yeah.
that stuff. I mean, also, I'm babbling on. Christopher, what are your thoughts as someone who read this?
And read the book or read this comic here?
Read this?
No,
Yeah,
no, this was fantastic. The whole thing, the thing about reading this was, again, I wasn't around when that book came out. I
yeah, yeah,
didn't get to actually see the fallout and how things happened, but reading through it, I got to feel it and go, oh, I understand. Because there are some, Alan Moore says to always write what's true for you, and it will
Mm,
resonate with other people.
yes,
And that's what happened here, is that while I didn't experience this, this was a true thing for you. This is something that happened to you, and it resonated with me. By the end, I was going, wow, I understand. Like, I understand what makes this a great comic. Um, so that was my input after I finished this thing.
sure. Okay, well, thank you. Also, I did want to mention, I thought it was extremely funny that there was a rumor that some computer hacker in the late 80s may have programmed their computer to hook up to their phone to repeatedly dial the number automatically. I thought, whether that's true or not, or whether that's what we call an urban legend, that's a really funny idea, whether it's real or not.
Absolutely. Next page here. Anything to say?
So I wanted to take the reader through the idea that since the other Robins that I told you about several pages ago, there have since been even more characters that took on the Robin identity. And so I want to tell, again, I'm also telling this to a mainstream audience which may not care or know about comics. So I want to tell you about, there's been a female Robin, there's been Tim Drake, there's been Damian Wayne, which is the love child of Batman and Ra's al Ghul's daughter, Talia al Ghul. And then I saw an opportunity to give both comic fans and non-comic fans alike another documentary overview. In comics, this has never been done again. No comic book company since has done a phone vote to determine the outcome of a story, much less have a death or a survival. And I quickly wanted to give you a boom, 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 like supercut of other major deaths. Superman famously died. He came back. Captain America famously died. He came back. Phoenix from the X-Men died. Big surprise. She came back. So I just wanted to have a playful sense of humor about, hey, many of us love comics. Like talking about wrestling, you're a big wrestling fan. We embrace the tropes of what we love, even as we love it with a purity of heart. So I would imagine you love the tropes of wrestling as much as you might love the obvious, more substantial stuff.
Absolutely. Absolutely. We're going to move to the next 2 pages. Is that okay?
Oh, yeah. Well, let me just, so this is the end of this
one.
particular story. Let me just linger. So for the final panel of this little miniature essay, I thought, let me pan over a graveyard of other characters that have died. And so there's some supporting lesser known characters, Green Arrow, Peter Parker's brainwaves were transformed into Dr. Octopus's brainwaves for a while. And I thought it would be funny to place a big old phone on a grave to symbolize the phone death of Robin. And then I also thought it would be funny to have on the gravestone, R.I.P., but just wait 8 issues and they'll be back. And
there we go.
So that was, and there's also, for those of you that are film students out there, the famous movie Chinatown with Jack Nicholson from 1976, 75. It ends with them talking about corruption in the city and how society is, always going to be imperfect. And someone goes, forget it, Jake. It's Chinatown. This is just the way the world is. The world's always going to be kind of messed up. And so I wanted it to end with, instead of forget it, Jake, it's Chinatown, it's just remember, it's comics. So that's my little final button to that story.
It was a wonderful, just condensed as a documentary. It was wonderful. Again, this was easily my favorite one to read.
Thank you.
No, this thing killed. This thing crushed.
Thank you.
Let's go ahead and see, because there's so many other short stories. Let's move forward and see the next ones that we have. I think I cut it off for another one. Guardians, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you. So this is another comic about my experience of reading a comic. So this is about one of the big hot artists of the 1980s. Was an artist named John Byrne, who is still alive and is about to publish a sort of X-Men fanfic that he did after he stopped making books for Marvel. But he created a group of Canadian superheroes, which had never been done before. And they guest starred in X-Men early on in the X-Men books when Chris Claremont was the main writer. And he decided to give them their own solo book. And the Canadian superhero team is called Alpha Flight, which is just a cool name he came up with, John Byrne came up with. And at the time, this artist, John Byrne, wrote and drew his own stuff, always, pretty much. And he was the hottest of the hot artists. I mean, I don't know, who would you say is like one of the hottest artists now, Christopher, in your frame of reference?
Daniel Johnston, I believe
Oh,
is
Daniel
his
Warren
name.
Johnson, right?
Yeah, I
Yes.
believe that is the number one guy right now.
Yes, I would agree, and he is pretty freaking amazing. So
But at the
John
same
Byrne had
time, oh, go
yes.
ahead.
No, you go first.
Well, at the same time, back then they were superstars. Artists were
Yes,
legit rock legends compared to
yes,
what we have now. Now it's like a folk legend, if you will.
yes, yes. So John Byrne was a pretty much of a megastar, and so he did this comic called Alpha Flight, and he tried to do unusual things with a group book. One of the elements was that although it was a team book, there were a
Mhm.
lot of solo adventures, and they only got together as a group once in a blue moon. So this is kind of setting the stage and setting the table for a major dramatic death. It is funny, both of these stories are about dramatic deaths in the 80s in comics.
I liked when I was reading it. I said, okay, this is perfect because it is kind of the same, but it's two different places. Because John Byrne is also a major player in how this story unfolds,
Right.
whereas the other one is talking about Robin. Real quick, I'm going to stop us and talk to
Yes,
Hakimi because he has
yes,
a
I was
question for you. So is Jason Todd's death more extreme? Did the audience feel more guilty? They had led him to a death, etc., etc. I'd love to have got a little bit more about you and how the story impacted you or the comic space. Anything
Oh,
you want to
good,
say to
good
close that
point.
out?
Yeah, Hakimi, good point and good question. Uh, it's funny. I certainly I think at the time I was very concerned with getting the story done in what was it, 8 pages or 6 pages. So at the
Mhm.
time I was a little bit almost afraid to go on more with more emotional reflection in that story. I can tell you now, just speaking conversationally, it was a real mix of being satisfied that we had like given Batman more reasons to be depressed. We were like, yeah, Batman works best when he's sad, and we made him sad. But also kind of a sad, twisted guilt that we gleefully killed this, 14-year-old boy or whatever age he's really supposed to be. Uh, Nevertheless, though, we kind of wanted some drama in the Batman books that we felt had been lacking. And much like a soap opera, when they do something dramatic or someone moves away or dies, that shakes up the status quo. So, but it was definitely, a lot of people looked at it as something very grim and twisted. Like every 5 years, all the parents go, "Oh, comics are going to rot your brains," So it was that sort of thing.
Just a fine point, yes or
Yeah.
no. Were you happy when he died?
Yes.
Yep, we
Yeah.
all were. No, all
Yeah,
right,
man.
all right.
Also, they'd made him sort of an unlikable dick of a character.
Yeah. All right, fantastic. You ready to move to the next two pages and dig into
Yes,
John
please.
Byrne? Let's see
Absolutely.
what happens. Because this one, actually, you go ahead. You go ahead and talk about this one. I'll make notes later.
Well, also, you go first because I've babbled on quite a lot. I want you to, you
No,
know.
no, this is about you. I want to hear more about you, but this one felt more personal in some of the things because you also share some art that you did personally on a
Oh, that's
shirt,
nice. Right.
and you share just these opinions. And that ending, how this ends, is such a sticker. Go ahead and let me know these two pages for you.
Certainly. So, as I do, remember one of my watchwords is tell the story like I'm telling it to you at a party, whether you're an
Yes.
acquaintance or a friend. So, my wife and other friends would tell you that my brain, like many of ours, I go in a lot of diatribe transgressions or non sequiturs or whatever. So, I'm like, hey, before I do that, let me tell you how I got into comics in the first place. And for many people of my generation, the Star Wars comics, which came out right after the very first Star Wars movie, were a huge gateway drug, were a huge indoctrinator into comics, right? So you're a kid, you see the very first Star Wars movie, it blows your mind. You're like, wow, I've never seen anything like this because back then we hadn't. And there's Marvel with a whole line of Star Wars comics. So you're like, yeah, I want to see more about these characters, which back then for us were very fresh and new. In the pages of Star Wars, there's ads for the very first Marvel Secret Wars book. So their marketing worked like a charm. So I went from buying Star Wars comics to buying Marvel superhero comics, and then to discovering John Byrne's Fantastic Four, which was a big deal in the world of Fantastic Four. And I also talked to you about how back then, and actually still now, many of you probably know this. What day is New Comic Book Day? Well, it's Wednesday. But in the old days, when I was a little boy in the 80s, whatever, sometimes comics came out on other days of the week. And I wanted to do a quick digression because I'd never seen that talked about in any comics journalism, that the day that comics came out had like fluctuated over the years. And eventually, for whatever reason, they settled on Wednesday. Had you ever thought about like why do comics come out on a certain day or?
As soon as I read this page, I even have a note over here
Yeah.
about the schedule because it was something I was like, well, I haven't thought about this. I've never
Yeah.
considered this. Is there something dark and sinister to this, or was it just a good day to sell books? But I thought it was an interesting diatribe, a little transgression thing, whatever the word
Yeah,
is.
digression. By the way, a quick sidebar. The reason comics were on Wednesday is because new records and books, like music albums, any new music and books came out on Tuesday. And so they didn't want comics to come out on Wednesday at bookstores and retail because they wanted Tuesday to be the day where all the music heads would come in or all the literary book readers would come in. So they almost wanted to give comics their own special day so that they wouldn't
That makes
overlap
sense.
with the new music or CD releases or whatever.
I'm glad you answered that. Let's talk a little bit more on the next page for the Canadian super team that we will not learn anything about Canada in this book.
Yes, right. So that's my homage to the first appearance of this team. They battle the X-Men in a very old issue of the X-Men. And I draw myself holding one of the John Byrne Fantastic Four issues. We were just, like you said, like Daniel Warren Johnson when he first burst on the scene, we were blown away by this guy.
Mhm.
So I just wanted to convey how obsessed I was with these comics.
Oh, is that the last word I had to say on that one?
Yeah, I'm trying to rein myself in because otherwise I go on too
Oh,
long.
you're fine. You're fine. Let's go ahead. We'll move a little bit forward because there are a
Okay.
lot of interesting tidbits I do want to dig into.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
tell me about these
So
2 pages.
Alpha Flight, they give him his own book. They give John Byrne, they say, we want you to do Alpha Flight. As a quick sidebar, those of you who follow comics deep cuts, they actually said, we want you to do an Alpha Flight series. And John Byrne, the writer artist, said, I don't want to do it. I don't think they're interesting enough to have their own book. And the Marvel editorial said, all right, we'll give it to someone else. They'll work with your characters. Someone else will write and draw it. And John Byrne, famously with a healthy ego, said, they're my babies. I created them. You're not going to give them to someone else. If anyone's going to screw it up, it's going to be me. I'll write and draw it. Like the fear of someone else working with his creations drove him to say, actually, on second thought, I'll do the book. So he takes on the book, and it's very fascinating because John Byrne is kind of a mass of contradictions. Like a lot
Yes.
of creators, you see Rob Liefeld doing things like this. Sometimes they're really kind and nice and what I would call progressive. And other times they seem like a cantankerous, cranky old man who is shouting about how the kids today are idiots or whatever. So I try to examine that. And sometimes maybe their way of thinking about societal issues is what I would consider wrong or very outdated or harmful to populations in society. So in any case, though, let's look at the things he did that were very groundbreaking and I would say progressive. But Christopher, wait, did you have a sidebar?
No, no sidebar. It was one of those things where as I'm reading this, I'm going, I agree with him. No one should touch my work. I agree with him. Let's make a
Yeah.
character with dwarfism. Let's do the other character. Like all these things. I was like, okay, cool. No, he's a
Yeah.
cool dude. I don't know anything about John Byrne, by the way. So
No,
this was
correct. Yeah.
exciting. That
Well,
yeah.
it's
So go
kind of
ahead.
like in the eight. I'll get into that overview later. So he has this character who has dwarfism named Puck, whose name is Judd, Judd,
Mhm.
and this is the first. I mean, I researched it. This is the first character who has dwarfism. I think they're also called little people. Obviously, different populations will have different discussions about what the preferred name is. Uh, However, thinking broad strokes, I thought to myself, as a nerd consumer of pop culture, I was very into Game of Thrones and the TV series and the books. And I thought to myself, huh, this is the first character with dwarfism in comics. And several years later, George R. R. Martin creates a leading, amazing, compelling, charismatic character uh, with the same condition. And I just, something in me thought, I have a thesis. I'm creating like a Sherlock Holmes thesis. I genuinely still believe to this day, George R. R. Martin, as everyone knows, was a massive comic book obsessed fan. And he grew up in suburban New Jersey, where I coincidentally am living now. And I thought, I bet that whether consciously or subconsciously, if I ever get George R. R. Martin in a room, I'm going to ask him, were you reading Alpha Flight, and do you think this helped inspire the creation of this other character? Anyway, so that's one of my theses that I put forth in this book. Well, Christopher, what do you got?
It's a spoiler at the end. It is that was one of my other things I was excited to get to is at the end is I love when someone has a crazy theses and they're like, I'm going to die on this hill. I don't care. And then at the end
Yes,
of this book, we're
yes.
like, you know what? Maybe he did. I agree with
Yeah,
him. George did read this.
yeah.
Next page here. Go ahead and let me know anything about this.
Well, sure. So John Byrne also created the first gay superhero, the first gay male superhero, which is Jean-Paul Bouvier, I believe is the correct
Mhm.
French pronunciation of the character's name. He's a superstar, I believe, skier, an Olympic level skier who can go super fast. He has super speed, and he uses his mutant powers to win Olympic skiing team events. And his name was North Star. And I have to say that John Byrne, for a guy who seemed to become what I would call more perhaps curmudgeonly, conservative, and perhaps closed minded in his later
Mhm.
years, in the 80s was very progressive and seemed to present a subtle, nuanced, non tokenism presentation of a gay character in comics, which at the time was unheard of. Um,
Yes.
and so, however, when John Byrne left that title and then left Marvel, Alpha Flight continued to go on for another 100 issues under the care of other writers and artists. And eventually, Marvel, with the issue when they revealed that he publicly comes out, right? He publicly announces that he's gay. That story is famously joked about by comics fans as being a little bit, I guess you could say, hitting the reader over the head
Hmm.
with Marvel wanting, great to have a character come out, but it was almost like, I need you to know that I am gay. You could almost picture it like an anime. It's like the characters flying up in the air, like going gay, like a little bit ham-fisted, perhaps, a little bit over the top.
And this being a kind of more of a documentary, seeing that panel and reading that, right? Like understand I immediately understood, oh, they did not do this right. Like if he's able to
It was
joke
not
about it in this way, yeah.
nuanced.
Anything else on these two pages or ready to
I
move
will
on?
say as a quick sidebar,
Yes.
even though Marvel's coming out issue was perhaps lacking in nuance, even though it was over the top, there have still been many readers who said that it meant a great deal to them emotionally to see a character being accepted, coming out in a mainstream Marvel comic, even if it was presented a little bit bombastically, shall we
Of
say.
course.
So I thought that
Absolutely.
was there's a dichotomy there, right? On one hand, it's sort of like, you know, on the other hand, still probably helped a lot of people emotionally not feel so alone in whatever small town they were in or with whatever repressive uh, family they may have had or whatever
That
the
is a
case may be.
fantastic sidebar. That is a good one to
Oh,
add.
thank
Yes,
you.
sir.
Um,
Um,
so
Go
yes,
ahead.
so moving on, and Marvel has since done a gay wedding with that character. So moving on, let's see. We talk about John Byrne gave one of the female characters multiple personality disorder, and that
Mhm.
was also handled more subtly than you would think. It wasn't presented like a cheap plot gimmick. And I would imagine this is just my analysis. That's a trope that's sometimes or a plot device that's sometimes used in soap operas. And I wonder if that was sort of a soap opera influence for this writer. Uh, Guess who ends up having a battle with Alpha Flight? Well, it's everyone's favorite Wolverine. And since John Byrne was on the X-Men when Wolverine was created, essentially, or shortly after Wolverine was created, in the last Deadpool movie, they actually make a joke about, ooh, the John Byrne Wolverine costume. And it was very funny for those of us in the audience who were alive in the 80s because we're like, they're saying John Byrne Wolverine in a movie. Like, this is wild. You know, I guess it would be like talking about Daniel Warren Johnson's Transformers 30 years from now in a major
Mhm.
film or something. So it was fun to talk about the fact that Marvel and John Byrne and Chris Claremont, they had Wolverine fight this Canadian superhero team. And now we go into the downfall of one of the heroes. There's an evil supervillain in the plot who invites them all. Where does he invite them all to carry out his evil plan? He invites them to the World Trade Center, which back then, was just a cool, iconic building.
Yeah.
And not expected to be tinged with tragedy as it has been in history. So I thought, even when I went back to do this comic, I remember going, oh gosh, I forgot that it was the World Trade Center in which this climactic battle takes place. Like, that has a sort of a sad, eerie resonance at this point. So, like they did in comics at the time, if a major character was going to die, and remember, back then it was pretty rare that major characters died, it was very
Mhm.
unusual. They still began that marketing trend of going, in number 12, in Alpha Flight number 12, someone will die. So just kind of like trying to hype it up in that bombastic way.
Absolutely. Which the next page, I believe we're about to talk about the
Yes.
death itself, right?
Yes.
Let's
And
go
by
ahead
the
and
way,
move
Christopher, I
here.
know I'm going on quite a bit. Do you have other impressions to share?
Not yet. I'm going to ask about the next page here that we're about to do, but we're going
Okay.
to talk about the first page first.
Perfect. Okay, so there's a big robot guy. Someone puts his brain in a robot body, and there's a big fight. And Guardian is the superhero that has the Canadian flag, much like Captain America has the American flag as the basis for his costume.
Mhm.
Guardian has the Canadian maple leaf logo as the basis for his. And you find out that Guardian's costume is riddled with circuitry that allows him to fly and shoot laser beams, and all that cool stuff. So when he gets in the fight with the big robot, with the evil villain's brain in the big robot, the robot manages to tear out a lot of his circuitry. And now our lead superhero character, who is the leader of the team called Alpha Flight, now he's incapacitated, right? He's not mortally wounded, but his suit is malfunctioning, and there's evidence that the suit is beginning to overheat and that the power pack might explode, much like if your car battery or your engine explodes in a car accident. So now he's in real trouble. And the way this was written in the comic managed to actually be thrilling and almost quite terrifying and scary. So then John Byrne did a really cool panel layout, which I have reason to believe he may have been inspired by a panel layout from a comic, 10 years or 8 years prior. He made the panels into numbers. And I thought that was so cool. Even if he had been inspired by a prior version of that layout, that stayed with me for years. And when I had the idea to do this documentary comic, I thought, I have to draw those cool panel numbers because they're so freaking cool. Christopher, what do you got?
That's the exact thing that I was going to say. Was I didn't know if I haven't seen the comic. I don't know the comic. So when I saw the layout, I said, "Oh, he knocked this out of the park." And the other part of it was we talked about you being a cartoonist. We talked about you being a journalist, right? We talked about how you don't necessarily write these kinds of stories, but the tension on this page, the way that he's fumbling, the way he's trying to get this done, the way it shows how you're feeling too. I said, "Oh, this is a perfect comic book page."
Oh, thank you.
And it's just the hands in the box, and it's still just a perfect comic book page to me. Um,
Thank you. And I
was this?
tried. Oh, sorry. Can
Oh,
I
go
do
ahead.
one more thing about this page?
Yes, go ahead. Go ahead.
Like a film editor, I wanted to intercut with me, like, teenage me freaking out as he was reading it, kind of a thing.
Yes. Yes. What is this identical to what the page looked like, or did the page look
This is,
different but with
this is
numbers?
almost identical, except for the intercuts of young
Okay.
Tony going, whoa. And also, to be honest, it was a good way to practice drawing hands because the original artist, John Byrne, drew the hands beautifully. So I was like, and I never trace. I never lightbox. If I screw up a drawing, I want it to be freehand. So this is all like when you go to art school or illustration school, they ask you to study the masters, and sometimes like by hand copy a classical painting or by hand draw a famous illustration. And it by drawing a really good hand drawn by someone else, as long as you're not tracing it, you learn how to draw hands better by copying the superstar artists.
It's a good answer. Um, Anything else from these two pages before we move to the next part?
No, I got nothing else.
Yes, sir. Let's see what happens next. And we have the death. It was a shock for me too, because this was a page turn for me. I said, oh,
Oh,
he
true.
really
Yeah,
does just die. Okay.
yeah. I mean, when I was probably 16, 15 when this came out, it was shocking because one thing you never did in a superhero book is kill the leader of the team.
Mhm.
You never did it. And I know that's why John Byrne did it. He wanted to play with readers' expectations. As a sidebar, by the way, he actually has said in interviews through the years that he thought that Guardian was the most boring character because he was kind of like a good guy with not much of a personality other than being like, nice guy, good guy, and so he thought it would pull the rug out from under the reader in a good way if he killed him so dramatically and so abruptly. One of the things in movies or TV, if there's a bomb and there's a countdown, we as an audience are so used to at the last minute they defuse the bomb, or at the last minute there's an EMP, right, that destroys the bomb's ability to function. We're used to these plot devices that either stretch out the tension or relieve the tension. This guy gave us something I don't think I'd ever seen at that point in my life, which is 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. How's the hero going to make it out? He doesn't make it out. Huge explosion, dead, the end. And that was pretty gutsy at the time. Like, there was no clever way out. There was no way to buy a couple extra seconds. And his wife walks in on him as
Yeah.
he explodes. And I thought, okay, wow, that's pretty brutal. That's savage. And when I say readers were stunned, readers were stunned. And then I wanted to tell the readers of this story. Turns out that a famous comic book writer at the time named Peter David
Mhm.
had given out preview photocopies of this issue at a comic book convention like a week or two prior to the issue coming out on the stands. And then John Byrne and Peter David got into beef. They got into a big fight. He was like, "You spoiled my story. You showed it at a convention before. You were trying to undermine me." And Peter David was like, "No, man, my job was just to do promotion for upcoming issues. And I didn't really mean to spoil it. I just was giving out preview copies like we always do to retailers. So whatever the truth is, we'll never know. But I thought that was interesting. I like hearing some of the gossip about like what goes down at comic book conventions among editors behind the scenes.
It's these little notes like this while reading your stories where I'm like, this is a fun like sidebar. This is a really fun thing to learn about because I would have never looked it up. I would have never learned about it otherwise. We move into Heather, I think was the name. Is that right?
Yes. So
This is the
John,
part of the story that for me reading this is where I got really interested as we start
oh
talking
wow,
about John
okay,
Byrne. So go ahead about this.
cool. So Byrne did. It's funny. Some of Byrne's '80s work can be seen as kind of sexist tropes.
Mhm.
Uh, However, at the same time, people are complicated. He really did go out of his way to present stronger, independent female characters in ways that were pretty progressive and quite impressive at the time. Uh, Heather was now a widow. We joke about the old '90s trope of if there's a male superhero, too many writers were killing the girlfriend just to give him what we call man pain, or to give him some reason to be depressed. This was the reverse 20 years before those tropes. The leader dies and his wife is left to pick up the pieces and to
Mhm.
be going through grief and depression and survivor's guilt, right? In real life, therapists always say if someone dies, those near them think, what could I have done to stop it? Maybe I could have saved that person's life. What could I have done? And survivors will torture themselves and sometimes make themselves more depressed out of a feeling that they could have maybe stopped it. So I thought this was quite mature subject matter to be addressing in a superhero book in the
Yeah.
80s. And
Yeah, it was interesting when I was reading through this. I was like, man, I am actually now interested in a book I had no interest in prior.
yeah, and he gave this character whose name is Heather McNeil Hudson. He gave her like a quiet dignity, and it
Mhm.
didn't feel over the top. It didn't feel pushed. It didn't feel like hitting the reader over the head. So to me, this was very compelling to me as a reader.
Yeah, no, I agree. I'm gonna move to the next 2 pages. Is that okay?
Yes. Yeah.
Let us see what happens. Oh, this is this is the page where I start to learn a little bit more. Go ahead.
Yeah. Why don't you wait? Can you take me through it a little bit? I'm curious to hear your impressions.
So again, I thought it was really cool to see someone who's going to stand up for their content to say this is my book, I'm going to do this, I
Right.
no one's allowed to touch it. I thought it was really cool to see here are my heroes, the openly as openly gay as possible.
Sure.
And then the other one is dwarfism, and then you show like all these little things that are adding up, and then you give me the quiet dignity, you give me this female character who's surviving this. I'm like, these are really great concepts. And then on this next page where we get, I believe this is all just everything he says, right? With no apology, I believe is what
Right.
it
Well,
says.
so the left side of the page, before we get to the like
Before we
what
get
I
to
would
that.
before we get to the bad stuff, the left side of the page is in the Fantastic Four, the female member Sue Storm or Susan Storm, played
Mhm,
by Vanessa Kirby in the recent movie. She was always called the Invisible Girl, and this is the older generation when any woman under age 65 was called a girl, and eventually society got hopefully a little more enlightened and said, maybe you're not a girl if you're 35. Maybe we should call you a woman or a young woman or whatever. So he was the creator that said it's demeaning to call her the invisible girl. She's a wife, she's a mother, she's older, she's an adult. So let's call her the invisible woman, which at the time was a big change. And John Byrne also, this never gets talked about in comics journalism. He created the first lesbian character in all of comics, which was a Superman police detective when Byrne took over the Superman comics. And even the portrayal of Maggie Sawyer as a lesbian was subtle for the 80s. So that was commendable. Then we get to what I would characterize, me personally, as sort of the close-minded, angry, bigoted rantings of an older generation person who has a problem with trans people existing. And he's trying to, like a lot of older people do, not all older people, but some older people go, this is a problem in society. These people are a problem, and I'm going to solve it. And I'm going to tell you why they're so screwed up. And this was very repulsive to me personally. Now, Christopher, take it away and give me your impressions.
No, I mean, you pretty much hit it. Where again, I had the progressive man in mind, and I'm like,
Right.
I know he's a little complex. He's a little complex. He's not going to be that bad. And then you get to read through it, and you're like, oh
Yeah.
buddy, pal.
And
Um,
so I just I really I wasn't out to like try to destroy him. I just wanted to chronicle the reality of the statements,
yeah, no, absolutely. Um, but yeah, again, it was a fun twist, a fun twist
No, I
on
understand. I understand.
as a
Yeah.
documentary. You get to go through it, and then by the end, like, hey, by the way, let's twist the story one more time for you and make you feel
Yeah.
this now.
Yeah.
Do you want to go to the next two pages and talk a little more, or
Yeah.
we have more here?
I'll say a quick sidebar. John Byrne, and to be fair, many other comics creators, actors, directors, some of these individuals can be very argumentative and love getting
Hmm.
into public squabbles with fellow artists. And John Byrne is somewhat infamous for this habit. And so, Mike Wieringo famously did a caricature of Byrne typing away at his computer like an angry keyboard warrior, screaming insults at other artists. So I just kind of thought I have to kind of mention that also.
Is that's what this is? Is that based off
Yes,
the
that is
character?
my illustration of a famous artist's caricature of angry, ranting, argumentative, and kind of mean John Byrne.
I love all the little Easter eggs that you put into these. Um, let's see what happens here. Oh, this is where we get to talk about you. This is where we learn a little bit more about you. Go ahead on these two pages.
Sure. So, having cataloged those many offensive, what I would call bigoted statements, I I wanted to go back to, nevertheless, before I knew about all these later statements that were made, 15, 20 years after the Alpha Flight series that he did, uh, I really did love this book. And I thought it would be fun to show you literally drawings I made at age 12, 13. I got acrylic paints and painted the characters on a t-shirt manually, like directly painting on the shirt.
Mhm.
And because I will say this, anyone who is listening, if you're an artist, please try to get your parents to like not throw out your childhood art, because one day you're going to be 40 or 50 and really want that art just out of your own nostalgia, just to look at what you drew when you were a kid. And my mother thankfully saved so much of my art, and my parents are thankfully still alive. And I thought, in the world of Photoshop, this is great. I'm just literally gonna Photoshop these into the page. And it's a quick sidebar is that my colorist Thomas Griffin also really helped me here, because I'm woefully bad at Photoshop because I'm an old, and Thomas is way better at Photoshop. So I said, Thomas, here's the drawings. Can you please just Photoshop them in at this angle? And that was done very well.
It was done very well. It does look good. Then we have our next page, which you've already let us know our theory on GRRM and how he was reading this the whole time. Anything else you want to expand on from that page?
The quick final part of the thesis is that not only was he perhaps inspired by a character with dwarfism, but the shocking, abrupt death of lead beloved characters. I think that is sort of a trope in and of itself. And one day, I've auditioned for some big Hollywood movies recently for substantial roles in them, and I'm not exaggerating. If one day I get to have a full-time acting career at the Hollywood level, I will corner George R. R. Martin. I will get him in a room, and I'll have coffee with him or soda or tea, and I'll say, George, fess up. Were you reading Alpha Flight? Because I think there's something about the shocking, abrupt death that it was. Well, come on. This is my dog, by the way. She might need to be let outside. Daisy, dude, what you doing?
Oh, do we need to take a break?
No, well, maybe, I don't know. You want to come up?
I think we're actually at the end. If you want
We're
to go
probably at
ahead.
the end of our time. Yes, there's
Yeah.
a dog, and so let's go to our last page.
Our last page right here. How do we close it out? What was your plan on closing that out?
So we close it out. Many issues later, when John Byrne was still writing and drawing the book, he tries to get you to believe that the guy who dramatically died, Guardian, is now back to life. But keeping in with sci-fi comic book tropes, it's really an evil robot pretending to be him to gain everyone's trust. So, okay. And then I literally decided to draw myself, like completing this little talk we're having, talking directly to you, the reader. And I said, basically, he did a lot of progressive things at the time. And then there are also these really horrible statements that are pretty awful. And people are complicated. But given that he did create the first gay superhero, and Marvel is continually making more movies and more streaming series, wouldn't it be great if one day we had a Marvel Cinematic Universe version of this first gay superhero whose superhero name is North Star? And so I decide to literally call out the Marvel executives and say, come on, Marvel, you got to do it. You got to give us this character when you start doing, more X-Men movies and more movies like this. And then I just said, all right, thanks for listening to my story. Thanks for reading my essay, and have a great day. So that's kind of the wrap up. I will say, by the way, as a sidebar, John Byrne has, in little scene comments, he has mostly rescinded and slightly sort of apologized for those comments. I'm not quite sure because the statement is a little vague, but I want to at least try to give him maybe some credit that he was kind of like, it was 20 years ago. I didn't know what I was talking about, and whatever, like that, whatever we all, process that to be. But I do believe I did see that some years ago, and it never really received any attention. So maybe he sort of saw the error in a great deal of those statements. I'm not certain.
We're not certain. I'm not going to stand on either side of that statement. I have no idea. But at the same time, this was fun. This was great. This is two pieces of history that I got to learn. Basically, two documentaries that everyone got to see. I loved it. I had a blast. Mr. Tony Wolf, where can people find you on the internet?
So I am on Instagram and Blue Sky at Tony Wolfness. So TonyWolfness, like the essence of me is my Tony Wolfness, which is a silly thing I made up years ago, and now it's all the social media handles. I also have a website, TonyWolfActor.com, and I'm actually selling my comics and this paperback full of these short story essays. I'm selling this comic and some other comics this coming weekend in Brooklyn at a great indie comics fest called BICS, BICS, Brooklyn Independent Comics Showcase. And as a little teaser, I'm debuting a new, I'm pretty liberal, so just to get into that, I'm debuting a new protest art book. It'll be an art gallery. I've assembled about 43 illustrators. So my work is in it, but it's really a showcase art gallery of many, many, many different artists. And I'm calling it Times Like These. Namely, when we look at a world where maybe fascism is starting to take over, maybe there's some authoritarian tendencies to control the media, how do artists express their dissent in a healthy way? Political cartoons, perhaps pushing back against the war we are now currently in. So just trying to be gentle about that, not knowing what your viewership or readership is like, but
Who cares?
I've gotten 7 Eisner Award-winning artists to take part. Bill Sienkiewicz, a legendary artist and painter from Marvel and DC, is doing the cover. And Peter Cooper, with a K, an internationally renowned and Eisner-winning writer, artist. His work has been translated into 14 languages. I've been very fortunate to get some real, honestly, superstar artists to contribute original work and some existing work that had only been on their Instagram to this book. And all proceeds will go to the ACLU for this special book. So
that's exciting.
And it's going to be announced in a mainstream news article tomorrow in a website that is one of the major mainstream news sources in even the business and financial world.
That is very exciting. So I was actually listening to divert us again. I was listening to Comics for All. Eli Schwab was on there just last night. And he was talking about you. He mentioned your name and he said that you had a secret project. And I texted him and said, "What's the project? Could I ask about it?" He said, "If he wants to share it, he will." This is that project, right?
This is that project. And we've been asked by the journalist not to make a social media post, blatantly.
We're going to cut all this out then.
Oh, that's great. That's right. Until tomorrow. So okay. If this lives on YouTube, right? I would imagine this.
Yes,
you
sir.
could restore this footage after tomorrow at noon. You know what I mean? If you're so inclined.
I'll do my best. I'll do my best. This was live, but I'll do my best. Either way, this has been fantastic. Thank you so much, Mr. Wolf, for being on and taking your time.
Thank you for having me. You're a delight to talk with, and I'm honored to be here.
Yes, sir. No, I appreciate it. I appreciate it so much. Thank you, Hakimi, for still being on.
Thank you, Hakimi. Yes.
Let me give one last shout out. He's gone, I think, but it said this was a blast. So check out the book. Interested to read more about the world of comics? Whoa, the ACLU. All right. You guys all have a wonderful night.
Bait for the bait room. Trash for the trash throne. Welcome to my emotional thunderdome. I am creative nothingness.